Okay, so we are going to be getting started in just a minute. Jeremy, thank you for sending the email. Yes, you are in the right place. We are having a little bit of a technical difficulty, so we apologize for the delay, everyone, but we will be getting started in just a minute. But in the meantime, let me go ahead and turn on my video, so at least I have video on. But in the meantime, if you all would like, if you could go ahead and type your name and your college and just maybe a little, intro in your inside of the chat, that would be great because we have a pretty small group today and rubrics are one of those things that makes everybody feel a little bit anxious sometimes. So I think it would be nice if we could kind of maybe share with each other and get to know each other a little bit in this, what we call, Zaretta Hammond calls the productive struggle that we are engaged in as we really rethink what it means to assess students in so many different ways right now in these times. And so we're really excited to engage with you in some tips about how to actually do it in Canvas, which actually before, I don't know, you all, let me see if you all can make sure you can unmute. So you can unmute yourselves if you'd like, and feel free to turn on your cameras if you to enable your video if you'd like. And maybe just if you could type in the chat what experience you have with rubrics, because I personally had absolutely no experience beyond copying and pasting with the rubrics. I don't know if that was the case for all of you previously or not, but I used to do it what I call the old-fashioned way, which is to copy the rubric to paste it into the document for the student and then to upload my feedback. And so I feel like seeing Nick's sessions has been really helpful for me because I've been able to get a sense of how to better support my students through being able to use the rubrics inside. And I just recently, I don't know if any of you are participating in those online trainings right now, where I know many people are doing the distance ed certification so that we can be qualified to do this make it official, right? But I was doing one. Okay, that's fine, Kim, no problem. Yeah, again, it's we totally get it. I mean, we experience it with our students too, right? With having the camera off a lot of times. So that's something that we definitely, it helps us to I think empathize more with our students when we go through that ourselves with all of the technical issues. My colleagues and I, we're just like, oh man, my internet's unstable right now, right? But so I only have experience with rubrics as a student and I didn't understand it then. Yeah. So when we think about like what a rubric can do, and there are a lot of different things that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of assessment, again, as we wait for Nick to join us, because there was a little snafu. It's been an exciting week. All right, let me go ahead and let this other person in. But we have to think about there are multiple layers. Hi, Nick.
Well, hello, everyone. My apologies for being late. I imagined we were meeting at 1:30, but here we are.
Yes.
Thank you for being patient. Let me get everything set up for you.
They're an amazing group, and we've already started talking about the multi-levels of rubric, and we've shared some of our experiences as students.
Can you make me able to share?
I would be absolutely delighted. Just one moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And thanks again to all of you for waiting for me. We'll make this session extra special and amazing for our time. Correct. Still.
It always is a speed. It would be hard for it to be even more amazing than it already is.
And here we go. I'm going to take one more second and just make sure, because I'm on a different computer. it required a bit more finessing, but there we are. So here we are, and we are going to be talking about rubrics today. And this session is one of our wayfinding series, and those are all situated under the same 3 central goals, right? And Keelan may have already talked about this a little, but what really brings us here and why we're so excited that you're here with us is that first and foremost, our goal is to create a sense of community in these online environments so that we can support student engagement and retention and work as a community to support one another. And that also happens in partnership with that second piece, right? That we have the opportunity to learn together in order to support our professional identities, especially as it relates to this online environment. And then finally, third, to provide our 3CSN network, all of you, with opportunities to dialogue, share, build and strengthen knowledge, and engage in productive struggle together in community. That, you know, that guiding idea that 3CSN believes in and is built into our mission, which is that if we build community, we can develop our capacity. And so 3CSN's mission is to develop leaders in the California community colleges who have that capacity to facilitate the folks that they work with, right? Networks of faculty, staff, and students for curricular and institutional redesigns for those big lofty goals, right? Increased student access, success, equity, and completion. And if you're having a moment of like, oh, yeah, but I'm not in a leadership role, right? 3CSN feels and acts accordingly that we can all lead from wherever we are, right? So wherever our space is, both our physical space right now as we're distanced from our students and from one another, and in the roles that we occupy, that by working as a community, we have what we need to come forward to support students and to make change from whatever virtual and real chair we might be sitting in. So as we get going here, we do want to pause one more moment before we dig into rubrics, just to think about what we need to be an effective community learning together today. Although I'm sad I missed our first few minutes together, I'm actually really grateful you had a chance to talk with Keelan and with each other to start to develop a bit of a sense of rapport. If we're going to learn together, we have to feel that we can chat with each other, connect with each other. And so just a moment to stop and think, what else might we need, right? What works really well for you when you're learning in a group with others, especially in this sort of third space of online? What's going to help us to be able to learn effectively and well with each other today? So what's on the screen now are some really solid suggestions that we've received over the past few months. And we're going to invite you to read those and also to see if there's anything that's missing. Is there anything we should add here to make this a more supportive and an inviting environment for us to work together today? So I'm going to quick read those aloud for you. What we have so far is that it works well for us to share questions, appreciations, and ideas in the chat, which it sounds like you've already been doing. And then, you know, feel free to send private chats to us as co-hosts if you need support, especially if something technical isn't working, right? So like if I switch to another screen or my audio isn't loud enough or something isn't working on your end, don't forget to communicate out to Keelan so that we can come alongside right away, right, and help support that. Please keep yourself on mute if you're not speaking. I might not be the only one with a small person in the background who sometimes likes to, you know, run around and scream as background noise. Although that's lovely and lively, it can make it hard to hear from one spot to the next. All of us to assume best intentions, right? We're doing the best we can in the environment we're in. For my part as a facilitator, I'm going to keep in mind that I need to allow time for folks to read the screen and to process, right? One is not the same as the other. So as much as possible to give that extra space and time. That's not empty space, it's processing space. For all of us to be invited to remember to keep in mind that we're all learners. We're doing our best in this new environment and with these new concepts. And when we get to a point where we're sharing or discussing out, or when you're working in breakout rooms with each other, to make sure that anyone who wishes to speak has the opportunity to do so. Anything else we should add to our list? If so, pop it right into the chat for Keelan, and I can add it to our screen. And if something comes up while we're going, by all means, let Keelan know, right? We're learning as we go. We're working with each other as we go. It's a fluid space, right? We'll come alongside and do what we need to make sure that it works for all of you. All righty. Again, I have one of these that says rubrics, but let's not take the time to find it. Instead, let's just imagine that right here it says that we're going to be looking at rubrics today. And some of our major goals for doing that is to give you an opportunity to think about a way that you can give feedback to students on whatever it is they're producing, whether that it's a graded activity, whether it's something that they've submitted if you're in a different role, like in a student services role with students and you're giving evaluative feedback on something, right? Rubrics can be used in a number of different ways, but they create an opportunity to give students feedback and also for students to have a better understanding of how whatever it is that they've done meets or needs strengthening in order to meet the benchmarks of that given expectation, activity, graded assignment, etc. And so we're going to look at how they work and how we can use them in Canvas. In order for us to get going with that, I'm going to invite you to prepare your workspace so that we can learn and practice together. So Keelan put a Google document in the chat. And if you're wondering where that chat lives, again, if you hover at the top on the right or the bottom on the right, you should see that link in the chat. And one of two things will happen for you when you click on that link. Depending on how your computer's configured, you might click on that link and then immediately you might see, ta-da! Here's our Google document, right? And it looks like a number of folks are already there, hooray! It says, welcome to our shared learning space for Canvas 102 rubrics. Okay, and it has our date, 7/1. But if you're like, gosh, I'm clicking, but I'm still stuck in Zoom land, right? What you might need to do on your computer is when you're on the Zoom screen, you might need to either hit the escape key or to come up to the top right and choose, hopefully you can see it on my screen, but like that double square, which is your way of telling Zoom, please minimize my Zoom window so that I can access my other windows. And then you can see that Google document. And if you've tried both of those and you're still having trouble getting there, no worries, just send Keelan a note in the chat. And with her fingers of fire, she will send you suggestions back. She's incredible that way. So once you've found the Google document, that's our primary workspace for today. I would also invite you to, if you want to, sign into Canvas. If you have a Canvas shell that you can do some practicing in or that you'd like to try and work through what we're going to do today or parts of what we're going to work through today, you're going to have some designated time for that. And so if that's readily accessible for you, easy for you to do, and something you feel comfortable doing, I'd invite you to take just a minute and go ahead and sign into that Canvas course. So I'm going to go ahead and transition us to the first active thing we're going to do together. And this is a bit of reflection. In order for us to really learn together and to see where our learning is happening, it's helpful to start with what we want to know, right? And look how beautiful this is. You have already started filling it out. Oh, it's amazing. What a birthday present. Thank you. So as it shows here on the screen, if you could please add your name, what brought you here, what questions or challenges you're thinking about as it relates to rubrics. And then if you're comfortable sharing this information beyond the space of our time together today, please let us know that by putting a Y or a yes over in permission to share. And if you're if you'd prefer for your thoughts and your ideas to remain private, then you can put an N or a no. Typically where we use this information is when we do updates to our network, to all of you, about what we've been doing, what's been working for folks, what's helped them learn. Having those real comments from all of you is a much more authentic way to continue to invite folks in to our learning than just us talking. So we really appreciate when we have the opportunity to share. We also respect your feelings and opinions either way on that. Just let us know what feels right for you. I'm going to give us about 3 more minutes to fill out this table to whatever extent feels right for you right now, knowing we're going to come back here. So we'll have more time to come back to this before the end of our session. As a reader, I'm super excited by what I'm already seeing you all put in the table, because I think it reflects the breadth of what rubrics can be in terms of how they can be used, what questions we have as designers, teachers, and what questions our students might have that rubrics can really help come alongside and support. But it also reflects, because they can be used in a number of different ways, and because they have technical aspects that can be useful, they can also be really complicated, right? So they raise a number of questions. So hopefully our time together is going to help to answer some of the questions or move you into next steps of how you would address some of those questions as we go. And again, we'll have a chance to come back to this table and look at it. So I'm going to, can you all still see the Google document on the screen with me now? Fantastic, thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, so what I've listed here are some guiding questions that in my own work in designing have led me back to rubrics, right? And I've been teaching online for a little less than 10 years now, and pretty heavily online for the past 5 years, mostly because I have a small person, right? So it's worked really well for my personal life to have that online teaching as part of what I do. Nevertheless, grading online can be really challenging. Giving students feedback when you're not in a face-to-face environment with them can be really challenging. So some of the questions that have led me to use rubrics and led me to kind of learn more about them, I've got listed here on the document, right? How can I offer feedback to students on the work that they submit on Canvas in a way that feels deep, rich, and authentic, right? How can I evaluate student work with less subjectivity? Is there a measure that I can use that's going to help me to create some of my own benchmarks for how I give feedback so that I'm giving feedback to students in the same way, right? A little bit more objectively as possible. And then how might designing a rubric help me think through what strong student work looks like in relation to my assignment prompt, right? So that's more of a benefit for me that then translates into a benefit for my students is, can a rubric help me figure out what I mean by strong student work in this particular assignment? And then last, how can I make the assessment goals and expectations super clear to my students before they begin working? And I already saw that question up in the table, right? Like, how might, in an online environment, I create a rubric that helps my students know what moves they need to make so that it increases the likelihood that they're submitting really strong work in relation to that assignment, right? So we're gonna go to Canvas to do some observing of how we're gonna do that stuff. What I want you to notice on this Google document is that there's a number of different resources that I've populated in here, and you're gonna have access to these resources now, and you'll have access to these resources forever, right? Because you now have access to this Google Doc. So these will be here. And this is a way to say, observe as much as you want, take as many notes as you want, but don't worry if you're like, gosh, I'm gonna forget that thing later. I've got them built in here for the resources for you. So this top resource, this is Learning Content Guide for this session, is gonna give you a lot of the details that I'm gonna share with you out loud. And then beneath that are a number of Canvas created guides on how to create an assignment, how to add a rubric, how to add a rubric to a discussion forum. So those are here to support you beyond the thresholds of this session, right? And then I've built a sample rubric that we're actually going to look at together when we get into designing rubrics. So you can see what those might look like and how you might use them. So let's go ahead and go to my Canvas course. I'm hoping you all can see this. Does it now look like a Canvas course for you? All right, fantastic. So one thing, quick note for you. This looks like a Canvas course, but you'll notice this word sandbox up here, which is a specific type of Canvas course. It's not a live course. There are no real students in here. It's a design space for me. So depending upon your campus, you may or may not have access to a personal sandbox. It really depends on, it's a local decision. But what's nice about a sandbox, at least in terms of leading our learning sessions through them, is that we can do whatever we want in here and it doesn't mess with any student lives, right? We don't see any student information. It's just a great place for us to practice together. You can practice without impacting students in a live course by simply designing things, and I'll show you how to look at things through what's called a test student, which is a fake student that you have in all of your classes. So you can still make a lot of these moves in a live course and simply not publish that material yet and see what it looks like. But if you have access to a sandbox, it's convenient because it gives you a chance to take risks without impacting any students who might already be in that course. So the first step in order to make a rubric is to have something to attach a rubric to, right? So students have to have a space where they're going to be demonstrating learning, and then you can attach a rubric to that. The two different types of graded activities that Canvas allows you to put a rubric with is an assignment, and that's what I'm pointing to over here on the top left. Think about an assignment as a place where students are demonstrating their learning either through typing in a text box and or uploading a file. Okay, could be a paper, could be an assignment, could be a photograph that they've annotated. Okay. But they're either typing into a text box or they're uploading something. Those are called assignments. Or if you've created a discussion forum and students are going to receive points for that, you make it a graded discussion forum, you can also attach a rubric to that. And I didn't know that you could do this until like last spring. And it was the most exciting day of my life when I realized that you could, because I mean, I have a discussion forum due every week of my online classes. And so I could make one rubric and use it all semester long, right? And give students consistent feedback on how they're doing interacting in those discussion forums. So I know it was so exciting. I think Keelan was actually with me the day that I figured that out online. It was better than my birthday. So again, assignments, discussions. These are the two places where you can build a graded assignment and add a rubric to it. So for ease of showing, let's go ahead and build an assignment. I'm just going to click on the assignment tab. And then if I want to add a new assignment, the way that I do that is I simply click on this plus on the right for assignment. And then Canvas is going to give me what I call my design space. And this is where I can fill this out as much or as little as I want while I'm building it, knowing I have the ability to come back and edit it before I make it live for my students. So in this place, in this point, let's call this birthday party essay. Hooray. And then here's where I could put in my prompt for my students, right? I'd type in those directions. I can also, because you'll notice that I have the ability to link things or to add files, right? I can put those in here. So let's say that I have a typed prompt that I've used in a face-to-face class, or it's something that I've sent to my students earlier before this assignment is due. I can go ahead and link that file right in here. So I could type out the prompt, but I could also say, here's a downloadable version of the prompt. And then I could just pop that right in there by choosing the file over here on the right. If I haven't uploaded that file yet, I can always upload a new file by choosing plus. So then that comes right into my prompt space. Okay. Anything else I might want to add, I can put it in there as well. So then I've got my points. And the only reason to note your points here is when you build your rubric, you're going to want to pay attention to what those points are so that they match up with your rubric. Once I've created this assignment, and again, there's additional choices I can make here. How do I want students to upload, etc.? Do I want them to type in a type box? What's the due date? All of those things can be added when I first build it or when I go back to edit it, whatever feels right for me. And then I'm going to choose save. Once I choose save, I come to what I call the preview space, right? So I'm building something new. When I was on that design space page, I didn't see anything for the rubric. It doesn't live there. It lives on this weird third space where you see the information about what you've already populated for designing this assignment, but you can't edit it here. It's just a preview page, but that's where this little button down on the left lives to add a rubric. So far we have added an assignment. We'd want to edit this before we made it public, but we've added an assignment, and here's where we can go to add the rubric. So when I go to add the rubric, I simply click it. It says plus rubric, and I get this sort of pop-up box that comes in. And if you're having a moment where you're like, gosh, that's a little small on the screen, or you notice that my forehead's getting closer to you, I do like you, that's why I'm bringing my forehead closer, but it's also really because I can't make this box any bigger. It's as big as it gets. So if I want to see it closer, I gotta lean in. It's just the way it works. So this is the design space for our rubric. This is where we'll do all the work of figuring out what this rubric is going to look like. So I'm going to take us back for just a second to our Google document. And then this little canvas bar, this little zoom bar needs to come down here for me. Thank you. That's better. Okay. I'm going to open up this learning content guide. And you can open it up with me, or you can just follow along. But I just want to show you where the information is that I'm going to walk through next so that you know what you're looking at. Okay? I'm going to start to use some terms as we build this rubric together. And the type of rubric that we're going to be building is called an analytical rubric. And that's a fancy term, and all it really means is that we have one or more criteria that we're going to build in the rubric in order to evaluate students. And we'll have at least 2 ratings that we use in order to give feedback to students. And I'm going to show you what those look like in a minute. But the type of rubric that we're building, the type of rubric that Canvas defaults to, is called an analytical rubric. And so that rubric has really 3 main components that you build when you make it. And so if we take a look here, you'll see that on the far left, that first component is criteria. Think about criteria as the elements of the assignment, right? So what are the major elements of this assignment that you want to separate and give feedback to students on? Okay, so that goes in the criteria section. And then in the middle is where the ratings go. Think about the ratings as having 2 purposes. Purpose number 1 is that the rating helps students to understand how their submission, how strong their submission was in this particular element of the assignment. But you can also use that rating space to give feedback on how to strengthen, on common struggles that students have, right? So if you've been teaching this class for a while, there's a good chance that you know the typical places where students struggle within an assignment. And so in that rating section, you can not only give feedback on how how this particular student did on this particular facet of the assignment, but you can also talk about, you know, in order to strengthen, make these moves, right? So it gives you a way to coach your students through what they could do next time as they continue to learn and strengthen. So criteria is the specific elements. Ratings is how that student has performed on that element, and potentially, if you want to build it in, what they could do next time. And the points is really a place for you to think about how essential is this particular element to the overall assignment, right? So if my rubric's out of 20 points and this particular element is 17 of the 20 points, that would suggest that it's maybe the most important thing that students need to demonstrate for this assignment. If it's only worth 2 points out of the 20, maybe it's something you're hoping they'll do, but it's not central. So making decisions about the points ultimately helps you articulate and students to see how important is that particular facet to demonstrating knowledge and understanding in this overall assignment. So in more detail, all of that information is in this area of terms and concepts. It talks about the criteria, the ratings, scores, and then walks you through how to consider some of the rubric conditions. And so now we're going to go ahead and model how you might put one of those together. So just like here, where I hit that plus rubric and I've got this design space, I could do all of my work in here. Okay? When I go to do work, I could choose on this pencil to edit, and I could literally start typing in my first criteria. So let's say I'm doing this birthday essay, and the first area that I want to see how my students are doing is their introduction and thesis. Okay? So I can type right into that box. I can list the description. This is the first element that I'm going to evaluate. And then in the long description, this is where I can give students more details, right? What does the introduction and thesis do? Or what are the essential components to that? Some further information to help them to understand the moves that they should be making in this particular area. So I could type all this in here, but if I already have a rubric saved, right, as a Microsoft Doc, as a readable PDF, or in this case, for our example, as a Google Doc, wait for it, here it comes. Then I can save my eyes from the squinting and the typing, and I can highlight and paste, right? So let's say that my first criteria, like in this sample rubric that you have access to, is thesis and introduction, and here's the further details that I want to include for students, right? Early in the paper, an introduction clarifies the central issues, adds details to create context for the issue. The writer states their opinion about the issue. In other words, here's what, in my class, the thesis and the introduction need to do. I could take this thing I've already written, I could highlight it by using my mouse to select that text. If I'm on a PC, I can hold the Control button and the C. If I'm on a Mac, I can hold the Command button and the C, and that's going to copy it. I can also right-click and copy. So however you want to do that, but then you can come right back to your rubric. I can right-click and paste, or I can, if I'm on a PC, Control V. If I'm on a Mac, Command V, paste it in. Boom, done, there it goes. So should you want to save your eyes from the typing, you can build your rubric in advance and then paste in. There's other really good reasons to build your rubrics in advance, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But now that criteria is in there. This is that first element that my students are going to need to demonstrate to show that their knowledge on this assignment. Ratings are these central areas here. Canvas defaults to giving you 2. All the points and none of the points. Maybe you want a 3-point scale or a 5-point scale, right? You want more ratings categories, different levels of success that students might have with this. In order to do that, you're going to want to choose the plus to give yourself more ratings boxes. Just recognize that Canvas, and I don't know why, builds them from the center out. So for my brain, that just doesn't work. It kind of breaks my brain to try and think about the middle category before I think about the first one or the last one. So my standard move is to just click on this plus, and then it's going to give me that middle box, but I'm just not ready to do anything with that middle box. But it's the pop-up. I can't do anything but do something with it. So what I do is I literally just put a period in the rating title as a placeholder. I hit update rating, and now I have 3 boxes. But let's imagine I want 4. Let me look at my sample rubric. I think I've got 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. So I want 4 here. I've got 1, 2, 3. Again, it's going to build from the center out. So I'm going to choose, in this case, either one of the pluses. We'll choose that one. I'm still stubborn. I don't want to have to build it from the middle out. So I'm just going to put a period in the rating title, hit update rating, and now I have 4 spaces. And now my linear brain can say, aha, I can either work from the lowest amount of points to the highest, or I can work from the highest amount of points to the lowest. And that just, it works better for me. So I just wanted to model that for you and give you permission to go any way that it makes sense for you. Canvas is going to try and numerically correct you to go in order of points. So it does make sense to build from the biggest amount of points to the least, because otherwise, let's say that you want the lowest amount of points here to be 7, like you're going to ultimately change these. If this is a 5 and you put a 7 over here on the right, Canvas will try and auto adjust it. It gets really frustrating. So it is worth it to work from left to right. When you're building a rubric, I find that it is worth it to work from the right to the left so that you can establish what I would call the benchmarks. So when you're thinking about building that rubric, think about what are the minimal things, minimal moves a student needs to make in order for you to feel that they are demonstrating some understanding, not proficiency, but some understanding. And so the language I would use for myself there is benchmarks, right? These are the basics. If these weren't here, it wouldn't even look like the assignment you asked them to do. Okay, so whatever those minimums are, those benchmarks, articulate those for yourself as the teacher, and then situate those where you feel it makes sense. In my opinion, if I see like the bare bones, the basic, the lowest common denominator, but there's something there, I'm going to call that category strengthen. There's something, but not as much as what needs to be there, right? There's room to grow. If you see where the students are navigating with this particular element really solidly, right? They've got what they need, it's passing, I would call that meets, right? It meets the thresholds. If they're making sophisticated moves, it's above and beyond. You can see where they not only deeply understand, but maybe they've added some level of detail, or they've taken some risks, some academic risks that really help make this sparkle, right? Something that you're like, wow, yeah, that's awesome. Right? They're going above and beyond. I might call that strong. And then if there's not even the most basic benchmarks, either they didn't make this move at all, it's not present, they didn't do this thing, or it's unrecognizable, then that's a nope, it's not there. My language for that would be not yet. It's not yet here. I can't give you points for a thing that isn't here yet. So you could definitely do more categories of ratings or less. I tend to do 4, right? 3 that are going to earn some score and 1 that's, nope, there's nothing here yet. And doing that work in advance really helps you to articulate what you think, right? Where you might be, what students need to do. And then again, you can highlight that information and paste it right in. Just like your criteria, you're going to come over to the pencil, paste it in. You can change the rating title. In this case, I'm going to get it to match, not yet. And then you can update rating. So then this rating, I would put in strengthen. This one I will call meets. And this one I will call exceeds. And then I'm going to go back and take a quick moment, highlight my content. Oh, I use strong here. I can change that. Paste it in. Oh, looks like there's a question. While I'm pasting, I'm happy to answer a question. Sometimes I can multitask. Let's see if it's possible. Keelan, can you either unmute Jeremy or have Jeremy, if you'll paste your question into the chat for Keelan, she'll share it with me.
Okay, I'm right here. Can you hear me?
I can.
So when you do your 3 categories that are in points, do you think in terms of percentages? So obviously the far left, when the strong will be 100% of that category, then does your middle column be like 80% and your...
Yeah, great question. You know, I want to think about what makes sense. For me in my classes, in everything that I do, meets is an 85, right? Strengthen is a 70, and not yet is below 70. But my students can revise everything they do. So it kind of depends, like everything works together, right? But absolutely, you'd want to think about what's the mathematical relationship between the language you're using and the percentage that ends up being there for that. I find that personally, when I am doing, if it's not a final assignment, so if it's not a major essay, let's say it's a short paper or it's a homework assignment, I don't have a full points rubric that goes in. I have a meets and I have a strengthen. And that's it. Meet, strengthen, or not yet. And then students can achieve strong or exceeds only with revisions. And so our class defaults to a B unless students choose to revise and hustle for the A. And I give specific feedback in order to do that. And what I find is that they love it. They really like the ability to, it takes the pressure off of trying to do anything perfect the first time, because that's not the goal. And so that's worked pretty well for us. But definitely figuring out the math in important piece so that it makes sense that their grade would reflect ultimately what the points.
And if you were doing a category, let's say on mechanical errors like punctuation or grammar,
Yep.
Would you, in your different columns, would you provide actual quantities where you start taking those deductions, like 5 or more errors would hit this category? Because that's been my problem in the past. I've gotten so specific, it's mind-numbing the amount of time that I spend counting all
Totally. I find that, well, 2 things. One, I don't include any evaluation of grammatical, and I teach English, but I don't include any evaluation of grammatical errors unless it is what's called a summative assessment, right? So any of their incremental homework, anything where they're forming and learning, I'll give feedback on mechanical errors, but I do not take points off while they're still learning, right? So when we get to an end of a unit or a place where they've had the opportunity to revise, then that's going to come in as a piece, and I wrap it up with the specific criteria. So instead of having it built into other criteria, I have it as a separate element, and that element is called wording. What is it called? Like wording, grammar, and professionalism. And so it encompasses everything from grammatical like how readable is it, to did you choose wording that makes sense for the audience that you're speaking to, right? The level of formality or informality, things like that. And rather than doing like 5 or more errors, I just leave it in a broader scope of,
Right.
you know, the choices meet the audience's need here. But I'm not, in research writing, it's not, having the flawless paper is a little less important for us to meet our learning objectives than having really solid critical arguments.
And I think that's a trap my mind has been in the past, is I think rubric and it needs to be exact and precise. Whereas I think it's to our advantage to keep it worded more broadly and more abstractly, while still holding some definite standards.
Totally. And someone in our group here added into the original, into our grid, that idea of co-creating rubrics, which I think can really help with this, right? Because students struggle with that dance between specificity for what needs to happen and the breadth of having multiple different students meet the objectives potentially in different ways, right? And so co-creating a rubric together is a great place to have a discussion where students might say, well, how many errors can I have? And then instead of you having to answer that alone and judge that alone, you can move that question back to students and say, okay, well, what makes sense for this assignment? How many errors realistically could someone have? And are some errors more egregious than others, and why, right? And if someone's like, well, a comma, you should get it right. And it's like, well, does it reduce the clarity? Is it as important maybe as making sure you have separate paragraphs or something like that? And simply that act of them dialoguing that out, and they're almost always harder on each other and themselves than they would be if you were to, you know, put it in the rubric. But then they have shared ownership in what that thing looks like. And I feel like they are more attentive. You know, if they help co-create it, they're keeping an eye more for like, gosh, did I check for my run-ons? We decided as a class run-ons were really important. Did I check for my run-ons? And so it takes some of that weight off your shoulders to try and have to be the definer of things and the evaluator of things. So it tends to work pretty well. On Zoom, you can do literally what we're doing right here, right? Where you could have a session with students where you're literally co-creating this. To make it a little less wily, what you could do is create a Google document, just like the chart that we filled in, where students put some potential ideas, what they think is important for an assignment, and do some of that pre-work, and then come to a session together where you do this. Or even use that Google document asynchronously and say, okay, we said these things were important. You guys brought this up in a discussion forum. Here's a draft, work in groups. How could we make this stronger? And then let them help you co-create it. So, so it takes some of that lift off from you. So if this were a real paper that I had, I would have more than just an introduction and thesis, but maybe this is just our first draft. All they need is their intro and thesis and we're done, right? I said that this assignment was worth 20 points. I've only got it worth 5. If I try and stop now, Canvas will let me know that my math doesn't work. So if I change this to 20, notice, poof, Canvas did its best guess on adjusting my scores. I changed the points to 20, it moved strong to 20, meets to 12, strengthened to 8, not yet to 0, but I can always come in and change that. One other space I want to note for you as you look at this is that there's in the criteria box at the bottom a range button. I think this is the most exciting thing ever, right? Maybe you feel like strong is 20 points, but that there's a, you know, there's a decent width between 20 and 8. Is it 12 for everyone? Might some students be meeting something more than others? Like, is it just a 1 spot or a many spot? If you choose range, then all of these have the potential to be a range. So then strong could be 20 to 12, meets could be 12 to 8, strengthen could be 8 to 0, and then you can go in and adjust that. So if I come in and edit here, maybe for me, if it's strong, it's really awesome, which means it's a 20 to an 18. And then maybe meets for me is really 18, I don't know, to 10. And maybe strengthen is 10 to 0, and then not yet. So you have the flexibility to change that or to use a range if you want to. If you need to add a second criteria, most rubrics have more than one. You can just choose the criteria button, and Canvas will ask you, do you want me to duplicate what I already have or make a new one? Most of the time you want a new one, although sometimes when you're making one for discussion forums, you might have the same category more than once. And then you can build a new criterion right there. The last choice you have to make when you are building a rubric from scratch is to tell Canvas how you want that rubric to function, right? So everything down here, once you've built the rubric, functions as a filter. So if I don't want this rubric to have points, I want to give feedback, but I don't want to give points, I simply check the remove points from the rubric. And then it'll give me the categories to evaluate, but I can add a score separately. Okay. If I uncheck that, poof, the points come back. So again, remember it's a filter. So that way you don't have a heart attack. If you check one of these boxes at the bottom and something goes away, you haven't lost the work that you did while designing it. It's just a filter you can take on or remove, depending on how you want to use that rubric. If you want the rubric to be a thing where you can click on it and then the points get added and then it goes in the gradebook, you have to tell Canvas that. And it's this box that says, use this rubric for assignment grading. Otherwise, it will add up the points, but it won't put them in the gradebook. You'd still have to manually type it in.
Nick, we had a couple of questions.
Sure.
If this is an okay time to ask them.
Totally.
Okay, so Gurley wanted to know if you could add a rubric to an assignment for any type of submission.
For any type of submission. So if it's like a text box or a
Gurley, did you want to ask the question so that it's more clear?
Yeah, sure. Because one of the assignments that I have done before with the rubric is a Turnitin submission. And yeah.
I don't know about Turnitin. I don't know how Turnitin functions with the rubric.
Yeah,
I don't turn it in.
So when I did what the do the plus rubric, doesn't appear at the bottom. So
it disappears when
if it's a Turnitin submission.
Keelan, do you know?
You know, I have never, as I was confessing to everyone earlier, I am a copy and I am a reforming copy and paste rubric user. So I haven't tried doing that. No, I haven't tried it.
And I wonder if it's, do you have to do your grading in Turnitin once you?
Well, I use Turnitin for their submissions, so I could check plagiarism too.
Yeah, the grading doesn't have to happen inside of Turnitin, but let me take a look at mine too.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if the rubric remains there or not. Now, one other place you could check, it sounds weird, but the only reason I'm thinking about this is because in discussion forums, if you have a graded discussion forum, the place that you find the rubric is up here in these top 3 dots.
Oh, okay.
Totally unannounced, absolutely hiding, which is why I didn't know it was there for like 4 years. So what you could try is if you add Turnitin, check out those dots. I wonder if the rubric moves there.
Okay, I'll try that.
No guarantees on that, but
okay.
maybe.
Gurley and I are gonna try this right now.
I dig it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Jeremy
Nope,
had
you're
one
good.
more. Jeremy had a question, but you go ahead and do yours and then I'll tell you Jeremy's question.
Okay, last thing I just want to show you here, last filter that might be really important for you if you want to use it is this all right freeform comments when assessing students. So let's say that you decide for whatever reason that you really like the criteria, but you don't want all this feedback in the middle for a particular time you're going to use this rubric. You can just click on the all right free form And then what you get is the criteria box, right? The element that you're evaluating. And then this will just be an open type space in the ratings. And then you can keep the points or eliminate the points. So if you run really, really simple where you're giving individual feedback for something and you don't want that more standardized feedback, you can have the criteria, remove the points, and you'll literally have the criteria on the left and a space for you to type in on the right. And that type of rubric can work really well if students are giving feedback to each other, because then they see the criteria and they're simply supporting one another and giving some feedback, because you can use rubrics in that way. So last but not least, don't forget to choose the Create Rubric button or all your work is gone. Oh, one other thing, title your rubric, because otherwise, my goodness, it'll be called some rubric and then you'll never find it again, right?
Oh
so
my
title
gosh.
title it something like essay rubric. And if you're like, what do you mean I won't find it again? It's at the bottom of this particular assignment. Let's imagine that you have another assignment you want to add a rubric to, right? The way that you do that is to go to an assignment that doesn't yet have a rubric. Let's try this one, discussion 1, week 10. Does it see if it has a rubric? Okay, let me see. I'm gonna click on these buttons. Check it out. See, if you go to a discussion and you, as long as it's a graded discussion, you click on the button, you can go down to add rubric. Here's the rubric. Now you can, again, build from scratch, or on the right, this is where it gets exciting, you can choose find a rubric. And keep in mind, you do not need a rubric that is perfect. You just need a rubric that has half the work done or more that you can edit. And then you're in good shape. It makes less work for you. And depending, however many courses you still have access to of your past courses, that's how many courses you can pull rubrics from. So this is where titling your rubric becomes really useful, because if you call them some rubric, you can't remember what you did with them, right? But you can go in, you can choose a rubric, and you'll see their total classes on the left, and then your rubrics per class sit sort of in that middle space. And then you can preview it. And if you like what it looks like, you can say, use this rubric. All right, I think I've got a couple more questions. I want to make sure I can answer those for folks.
Okay, so Jeremy, did you want to ask your question about the outcome option?
Yeah, I saw when you were building the original one we were working on that there was something about find outcome, and I don't load my outcomes, my course outcomes into Canvas. I'm assuming that's if you do.
Yeah, I've asked my campus Canvas guru about that, because I'd love to be able to use it for our departmental assessment. And his answer was, it's okay, it's not great. So I think it's a work in progress. Unless your campus, your local campus has done some pretty heavy duty work to have all of that loaded so that you can link. I'm not sure how dynamic and effective of a tool it is.
And where do you go to actually do the grading once you have assignments submitted?
Great question. Great question. I can share that in just one moment. We can take a tour while we go. Gurley, I can answer your question too while we go there.
Yes, my question is, I think I made a mistake before that I forgot to add a rubric on a separate assignment, but the students have already submitted. Will I still be able to add a rubric while there is already a submission on the assignment?
Yes. Yes,
you
can.
Still do it? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. You can add a rubric at any point. You can add a rubric at any point. Yep. Yep.
Right.
It will let you know if you started to grade and then you add a rubric, it will let you know that there would be students who have a score but no rubric filled out. Right?
Okay. Okay.
But you can always go back and add one. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I've
Okay.
done it many times where I go to start grading something and I'm like, why didn't I put a rubric on this? It'd be so much
Okay.
easier with a rubric, and then I build it. Right?
Okay. All right.
So in terms of where you use those rubrics, you're going to go into grades,
Mhm.
and that's the doorway into your grade book. Again, remember, this is my sandbox course. It's not real. If it were real, I'd have all these students over here on the left, right? And their scores would creep to the right. But because it's my fake class, I have one student, which is actually just me working as a test student. So then when you go into your grade book, you'll see which assignments have been scored, which assignments have been assigned, but students have not submitted to them, and that shows up with a dash. And then you'll see if there's an assignment that a student has completed, but you've not yet graded. And if you click on that, let's cross our fingers and see if there's a rubric on here. Oh, not one that I want. So let's go look at something that's already got a rubric, but that's okay. So when you click on it, you could just add a score, but if you click to the right with the arrow, that's where you get access to what I would call the second hallway that you walk down. So you turn down the hallway by clicking on grades to get to your grade book. You further go down the hallway of grading when you click onto the speed grader tab. That's where you can see the assignment. Again, because this is a demo course, right? This student just put in a stream of letters. This is going to be a not yet, right? This is just me monkeying around in here. But then over on the right is where I would be able to give feedback to my student, add a score, and then should I want to use the rubric in order to assess, I click on View Rubric, and that's when it opens up. I can make it a little bit bigger by adjusting this gray and white bar. But the theme of rubrics in Canvas is you will squint. There is just a little bit of, it never gets that big.
Need a large screen.
Or better eyes or something.
So-
Or a giant magnifying glass.
Don't say that on my birthday. Not on my birthday.
Magnifying glass.
So to grade it, you're not clicking on the category they earned, you're actually typing in points?
Nope, it depends on what you do. So if you set that filter on the rubric to say input my grade, then when you click on the category, it will add the points. So it depends on how you set up the rubric. If the rubric has that checkbox at the bottom that says add my points, then it will. Otherwise, it's this really unsatisfying situation where you click on these, right? And it is adding it up, right? Every time I click, Canvas is adding up the total amount of points here. And you'll see that 160 out of 350.
Mm-hmm.
But if I haven't chosen that, put it in the grade book, when I hit save, what will happen is I'll have this total score of 160 here, but this would still be 0 unless I manually come in and put those points in. So that's where it's worth it to click that box.
This was just awarded an unusually high grade.
You know, this test student's got a good life. They
Right.
look at this. All they
Must be that
submitted was
test
this
student's
string of,
birthday.
you know, they put in these, yeah, happy birthday to them. Happy
know.
birthday, test student. You did one line of consonants and you're getting 160 points. It's a good day.
I have to tell you that those green lines on the rubric are actually very psychologically satisfying. Like,
It's a little, yeah. I mean, as an English teacher, red is not a color I try to ever have near my students because they just shut down. And so it does make me, like if I had 3 categories here, 3 rating systems, the mid-level rating, otherwise known as meets in my test rubric, it gets yellow on here. So like if you're doing awesome, you get green. If you're doing okay, it's a yellow bar. And if it's not going well, you get the red bar. I don't get to pick that. Canvas picks that.
yeah.
So there's
And I saw
that.
you could add category comments over to the right.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yep. So in addition to, and I'll model where that is, in addition to being able to click on these, and let's say that you've done a much better job than this rubric, right? Your rubric looks much more like this sample rubric, where in addition to the overall category, you've got this language that says like to strengthen and give some notes to students. So let's imagine that your rubric is way more awesome than mine in this example here. And you've got your titles and your language. But in addition to that, absolutely, as Jeremy suggested, over here on the right, you can add specific comments that are unique to this student. So when I mentioned earlier that the way in which I grade in my classes is that the default grade, the first time students turn in a major paper, the highest they can get is an 85, which is, that is championed. Like, you met it. The goal was to meet it, you met it. And then there's a designated revision period where all students are applicable to revise. So when I give students feedback, right, they're going to get their categories here, their meets or their strengthen. But then where I give that feedback on how to get super strong, right, to hustle up for the A, is I put those individual comments into these boxes. Or I'll do it as a comprehensive set of feedback down here at the end, right? So I'm going to use the rubric to help get it to meets. And then for all of those unique comments that I want to give each individual student to help them tailor towards that A, I put those either in the comments here, or I come down and I make audio, video, or written comments down here. And if you're like, really, tell me more about how you do all those comments, we would love to have you come to one of our sessions on feedback, where we talk about the different ways in which you can use these feedback functions in Canvas to give additional feedback beyond the rubric or beyond written comments.
And since we're talking about other sessions, we also wanted to mention that we're going to be starting some peer review. Yeah, we're really excited. So you can actually practice, you can create a rubric and come for feedback from your colleagues and from Nick and whoever else is going to be supporting to get more support and some good feedback on your feedback, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. Imagine us as your Canvas fitness coaches, right? Today you came and you learned about the kettlebell, and then the next time you come for the peer review session, you can show us your muscles, right, in progress, where you're like, all right, I've been working with this a little bit. This is where I got so far. I have questions about this, or I just want to know what other people are doing, right? Those peer feedback sessions will give you a chance to literally share what you're doing with another colleague, and for, you know, folks to work with each other, or you can just come to observe and see what other people are doing and help their thinking along, which inevitably helps our own thinking too, right? When we can see what other people are doing, we get great ideas about what we might do too. So those are coming, probably in about a week, 10 days, as soon as I get them done. Very soon, very soon. Those are coming and will be on the schedule.
Yep, we're excited.
And I will arrive on time for those. I feel so bad. I've never been late to a session. All right. Okay, so let's get back to our tools and what's available to you in this here Google Doc. Right. So we've walked through a lot of this information, right? How to create that assignment, how to add a rubric to both an assignment and a graded discussion, right? And then again, this top tab here walks you through some additional learning content. And so not just these terms that we talked about, criteria, rating, score, different conditions or filters that you can put on that rubric. But then if you scroll down, there's additional information that I've included here if that's of use to you, right? So that move I made on how to import a rubric, I talk about how to do that here, how to pull a rubric that you have from something else. There's information on how to see what your assessments and rubrics look like from the student perspective, so you can turn on that test student in your class and see exactly how this looks in the gradebook, which is really helpful because it's not self-evident for students. I wish it was, but it's not. So it's good to go in there and see what students see so that you can walk students through in your classes how to see that information. There were a couple great questions in the table when we started about how to use rubrics as a tool to support students while they work. You know, how I've always given my students the rubric in advance in class. How do we do that online? One of the easiest ways to do that is to make a rubric outside of the one that's attached to the assignment, right? So whether you make that as a Google Doc right? Like I did here, or you make it as a Microsoft Word doc or a PDF, and then share that with students in an online class when you explain the assignment. So instead of waiting, because they're not going to go look at the grade, they're not going to go look at the assignment where they submit to think about the rubric that could help guide them in how to do it. It's just not intuitive, right? They're going to go to that Dropbox or to that discussion forum when it's the due date and when they need to submit it. So if you want them to engage with that rubric, think about how you could put it into a different form that they can look at it in advance. And then where would you put it in your course so that they're going to see that? Whether it's attached to the lecture video where you talk about that assignment, whether it's in the unit where they're going to be working with these concepts, but just thinking about a way to help students engage with that rubric early so that it can help guide their work. So I leave some tools in there for you, some suggestions for in there for you for how you might do that. And then some feedback on ways to use rubrics to give intermittent feedback, right? So how to use rubrics to help students while they're learning something, in addition to using rubrics to evaluate when they should already know how to do something, right? Early in a unit or early in a semester, students are often learning how, which is a different type of evaluation than when they're demonstrating what they know maybe towards the end of the semester. So how to use rubrics at different points. And then once you're feeling like you've got those pretty solid, I've added some advanced learning concepts in here for you to help support thinking about how the language you put in the rubric helps guide the students, motivates the students, helps them to know what to do, and also changes what the evaluation might feel like for both you and the students. And those concepts are really held underneath this larger title of Advanced Learning Concepts, Asset-Based Feedback. So there's a whole area of study on how to give asset-based feedback versus deficit-based feedback. And so I leave some notes for you on that as well. So all that reading you can do after a full day of doing Zooms or whenever you feel like getting around to it. It is there to help support your work. So what I'd love to do with our last few minutes together, I wish we would have had time to discuss in breakout rooms, but I wanted to make sure that we answered the questions, and I was late coming to the party, and so I apologize that you didn't have time to talk in breakout rooms, but I would love for you to at least take the last couple minutes and share some ideas about what you've gained from the session. I'm going to make a move on here that will make that easier to do, and I'm going to literally take this table and adjust our margins. Not that much. Wait for it. I'm going to narrow these a little over here, and that way you get more space over here. And what I'd love for us to do for the last couple minutes of our time together is just to invite you to go back to that Google Doc. Is there something that you learned or observed that you could add in here, right? To surface what that learning has been, either observations or ideas that you gained, connections or resources or next steps, just to crystallize that learning. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do that. We are coming up to that 2:30 moment, and I want to be as respectful of your time as I can be in a session where I was a latecomer. As you are heading out, I want to just share my appreciation for being here. Thank you so much for taking the time on your Wednesday. These documents will remain open for you, so you don't have to be done thinking now. You can go in and add your thoughts later. They'll be there. I'm also just going to do a little showcase at the bottom here. There's a number of additional resources that are attached to this document for you. Great stuff from Brown University, a great rubric design checklist from Arizona State. So there's a number of additional resources down here that if you want to dig into rubrics, have some more additional guidance, have some great models to look at, these resources are here for you as well. And the links to our additional sessions. And a bit of a shout out for our Summer Design Lab series, which will be starting this week, Keelan?
This coming week.
Next week. Coming week. Yep. And so those are 4-part sessions where you have a great opportunity to really dig in with a team of people for 4 weeks. And it's a different kind of learning that gives you the opportunity to go a little deeper, get a little bit more collective support with the same group. So they're great. They're great opportunities to continue to extend your learning. We're so excited you're here. We're so thankful for you. And we're so excited to see you, hopefully, in a peer review session in like a week or so, showing some stuff on rubrics, what we can do.